Hi, have you ever gone to a playground when you were a child and found it hard to access the play equipment? Or as an adult, have you ever taken children to play areas in public spaces and the children have found it hard to access? Or the adults who are supporting the children, have they found it hard to access the equipment to support the children? In this video, we're going to look at two public play spaces and look at them for their accessibility. We can look at the physical accessibility, the sensory accessibility, and the impact on behavior. And we're going to come out with a few suggestions on how the space could be improved, taking into consideration the financial implications to actually setting it up, and just considering what thought could have been put in place to improve that overall space for accessibility and inclusion. So let's take a deep dive, and I'm going to share my screen now. Let's see. Let's look at this first play space. Let's move in ever so slightly closer. There are a few things to start with from a physical accessibility space perspective. Number one, there's a path, a nice smooth path around the park. And if we look here to start with, there's a smooth path here. Now, that's great for wheelchairs, buggies, and people with mobility issues. If we then look at the slide area, because what we've got here is, it looks like we've got a castle type of area with a ramp going up to the castle and then slides going down. And also underneath the castle or tower type of area, there's a seating area. The whole space is great in terms of where people are going up and down. It's got nice mats, and as I zoom in, there are nice, what appear to be soft mats to break through. There's a but. The but is, if somebody's got mobility issues, what you're at, the challenge is going from the path to the actual space itself. So just imagine if there's an adult that's supervising a child who's in a wheelchair or got mobility issues, uses a walker. It's going to be pretty hard, sorry, for the person to go from the path to the actual play space itself. If the child goes independently, they might fall. How is the adult going to quickly and safely move and transition from the path to that play space area? It's number one. Number two, again, coming to the mobility issues. If we then look at the actual ramp itself, what we've got to do is, if you look at the angle of the ramp going up, it's actually pretty steep. Now, coming to the physical perspective, this excludes people who have got mobility issues in a wheelchair. Potentially, it'll be harder for people with crutches. But there's another thing that people might not have taken into consideration, and that's the fatigue. Now, the reason why I bring this up is because increasingly people are being diagnosed with cancer. Childhood, and it's said that, for instance, I believe some figures are along the lines of 1 in 2 people are going to get cancer. With cancer, and with some cancers, due to the treatment, there comes fatigue. And what you've got is the physical effort of going up this ramp. It can actually be quite a struggle. It's great that there are railings there. It's great that there are sight lines as well. But ultimately, that due to the nature of the angle of that ramp, it can take a lot of effort to physically go up this space. So one potential way that they can mitigate this, that they can reduce the impact, is actually extend the length of the ramp, because it looks like they've got space for sure, and overall reduce the angle, which means that it won't be as physically demanding for the person to go up. The other way, to be fair, if they're constrained to the space, would be to reduce the overall height of the that castle type of area by maybe, if you're in America or if you're using imperial, a couple of feet. If you're in England, 60 centimeters or so, something along those lines. I don't know how exactly high this is in terms of bumping heads, but there are ways of mitigating the angle. Also, by actually reducing the angle, you're enabling people and children who are potentially in a wheelchair, either in an electric-based wheelchair or one that has to be pushed. You're making it easier for the person to actually push the person up, so the person can still come down that slide. Now, what that would mean, if we look at from a behavioural perspective, is actually by the children and the adults, to be fair, not being able to actually go up these spaces, it can cause stress and anxiety. What you'll do is you'll actually get issues with around behaviour, and overall, it will cause tension. So the excitement of going to the playground, the ability to go and use that play space, will then be negated and mitigated by the inability to access. Now, again, taking a slightly further, or more to the point, closer look, pardon the pun, as we go in, if I look at this area and the sitting area or play type of area, it looks like there's a seating area where people can climb. It looks, and I stand to be corrected on this one, it looks like there's actually it's raised, and it looks like you need to step up. And there's a board. The only reason why I'm slightly confused is because there's a shadow here, but it looks like there's a step up. And what that means is that this space is not fully accessible and inclusive because they haven't put a ramp in place. And again, it wouldn't be difficult, judging by all the facilities they've put in place, to put a ramp in the space to enable people with wheelchairs and to access that space. There's one other point that I'm going to come across, and this is lines of sight, and this does link to the vision, also the stress and anxiety. If we look at the vertical bars or the vertical poles that are part of that handrail guard, whatever you like to call it, there's spaces. Now, people have anxiety. You might have kids that come along who are anxious, or the parents are anxious because they're concerned about their kids falling. So what the beauty of the spacing that's here is that there's a clear line of sight, so the adult and the child can communicate visually, and they can see each other, which is absolutely great. It's not a problem. But, or more to the point, and if we then look at the actual castle area itself, the spacing between the verticals is less or more. You know, like the bars themselves are actually closer together, which means the line of sight is reduced, which means what you've got is you've got somebody who, again, who's got anxiety issues, on either side. They can't see and they can't communicate. Now, one way that they can easily do this, and I fully understand health and safety, I get that completely. What they could do is increase the spacing between the vertical bars to then enable that line of sight. So still you've got the communication. And another thought that comes to mind is from a hearing perspective, or more to the point, lack of hearing. What you've got here is, because you've got the spacing, you've got the ability for sound to actually travel through that space, and also, again, the line of sight. So that if you have a child who's deaf or a parent that's deaf, there's still the ability to communicate visually, and also from an auditory perspective, the sound can actually go through the bars. You know, there's space. But, if we look at the castle area, what would happen is you don't actually have that space for people to communicate visually. So you might have a deaf parent or a deaf child that uses sign. How is that child or adult going to communicate using sign language, because there's no space, there's no line of sight for that communication to take place? And also the sound would also be harder to travel as well. So again, if, or carrying on further from that, if you've got people who have sign language, or not sign language, who lip read, again, the line of sight is not there to enable the lip reading to take place. So while this space is absolutely phenomenal and it looks an amazing place, there are a few things that they could do without drastically increasing the cost to make that space more accessible. I'm going to pick on another couple of points as well. It's great that they've placed, and it is phenomenal that they've placed the space within shade, because you've got some children and some adults, to be honest about it, who are more vulnerable to sunlight. And so therefore, by placing this space close to trees where the trees provide shade, not only is it cooler, but actually you're reducing the vulnerability to UV rays. So again, you've got kids who might have, again, thinking on a personal basis, when our daughter was going through cancer treatment, we were particularly cautious about her being exposed to sunlight, and we still are, to be honest about it. You've also got, from my understanding, if somebody is albino, they might also be more vulnerable to sunlight and extreme sunlight. I stand to be corrected. Please educate me about albinoism. I'd love to understand, you know, how the accessibility works in terms of what people need to think about when they go to play areas. But this area, for people who are slightly more vulnerable to UV rays, well, actually it's great because there's natural shade. My last point in this is the enclosed space. Now, my background is, my mum was a special needs teacher. So I grew up in this. I struggled at school. I worked with autistic children for 2.5 years in a school, and I'm a parent of two children who are autistic. And also, I'm a senior lecturer of special needs, and I've supported over 250 people plus on their MA dissertations in SEN. So I very much live and breathe this stuff 24/7. And one thing comes to mind when I look at this space is it's not enclosed. There's not a clear guardrails round, fences round. Sorry, that's the right word. And what you've actually got here is you might actually, I've worked with children who would run off, who don't have necessarily a spatial awareness. And I say this with a bit of a heavy heart. Unfortunately, this place doesn't have fences around it, which means that when I take myself back to working with some children, there are a number of children that I know I could not have taken to this space because there wasn't any railings around here. There wasn't any railings around here, which means that there would be a vulnerability for the children to run off. And that means by default, it's not accessible, which means the kids I know would absolutely love to, the kids that I'm thinking of would absolutely love to go there, but they simply couldn't go there. So again, with a bit of foresight, thought that what people can do is you can either put wooden or iron railings around there as well, and that would then enable the children who would potentially run off to then access this space and enjoy the space, to be honest about it. So here's one picture that we've covered on accessibility for this space. What I'm now going to do is refer back to another picture on accessibility for this space. And let's have a look at this one. So yeah, so let's look at this second playground. Let's go let's move in closer. Number one, let's look at the fence. Physically speaking, this play area has got a fence around it. Now, what that means is that for children who potentially would run away, they've got this nice enclosed space. Judging by the height, I mean, I'm not very good with heights, but actually that car looks relatively tall. It looks like an SUV type of crossover vehicle. And from the angle, it looks like the fence is above its wing mirror at a guess. So it's relatively tall. So it would act as a physical obstacle for the children to go out, which is very, very good from an accessibility perspective, because for parents or carers or people who are taking kids who might potentially run off, that means there are clear boundaries for the children, and actually the children can have got more space to run around in from a safety perspective, or there's less likelihood for them running away. So that's lovely. Another element, if we look slightly closer, is that there's a clear pathway, a hard pathway around certainly part of this. That would then enable, from a physical accessibility perspective, people potentially in buggies, in wheelchairs, with crutches, they've got a nice, clear, hard area for them to move around on. If we then move to the swings, again, the beauty is that there's a nice soft area, but not only is it soft, but it's also flat, so that again, wheelchairs, buggies can actually go on there. The swings are of different heights, so if people do need to be lifted up, there's an option for the carers to actually lift the person up. Again, that's very nice. From a sensory perspective, if we then look on the lower one, what you've actually got is some form of cloth around the chain. And for people who've got sensory issues, they might not like the feel of the metal, and that cloth acts as a boundary or a different sensation. They might not get necessarily the harshness of the metal, which is again which is fabulous. I have a concern though, and it's not a concern, it's a query. If we then look at the play area, the climbing area, it appears to be in a sandy type of area, which is great from a sensory perspective. That's lovely. There's a but though, and the but comes in that it would be harder for people with mobility issues, again, people who need sticks, walkers, or wheelchairs to physically access these spaces. And I appreciate that actually you need a softer area, but what I don't understand is that they've taken into consideration the soft matting around the area of the swing. What they could have done from an accessibility perspective is got the soft matting and actually put it around this climbing area. That would then have enabled not only the sensory experience of the sand that we've got here, so people can have that sensory experience, but from an accessibility perspective, again, people who use sticks, crutches, or in a wheelchair, they can physically get to this space. And so actually this space isn't as accessible as it could be, which could then lead to stress and anxiety, both from the adults that are supervising them and also from the children as well that are going there, which could then lead to stress, anxiety, and then you've got the behavioural issues, and potentially just and reduce that social interaction, because you might have children who've got mobility issues but they can't access this area. So it's impeding their ability to socially interact with other children and play in this particular area. Now, what I do like about this particular play area, can you see these pipes? You've got these pipes that look like you can put balls through, and basically you can say play catch or just have that experience. The beauty of this is that they've got the pipes at different heights. So actually you've got kids who might not necessarily be able to physically climb up to this area. They can still engage in the play activity because they could be lower down and you could have somebody on that platform putting the ball in so they could catch it. So you've got a nice area for that social interaction to engage if the people couldn't physically climb up. Coming back to what I previously said about the other place, it's shaded. So again, the beauty of this particular space is that there are trees around, so that for children who are vulnerable, or potentially the adults that are supervising them, who are vulnerable to UV rays and sunlight, and they need to be mindful. It's clear that actually people can come at a time of day when it's shaded. So again, that enables that level of accessibility for more potentially vulnerable populations. So what we've done in this video is looked at 2 different play spaces outdoor in public areas and explored the ability, their accessibility, their inclusiveness, because in certain spaces they simply aren't as inclusive because the way the system is enabling or disabling people. If you would like I'd love to hear your comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you'd like me to explore certain areas, in other words, feel free to put up an image of a play space, and I'm more than happy to go over and explore how accessible and inclusive it is, and also make suggestions on how the space and place could be made more accessible and inclusive. It'd be lovely if you could like and subscribe this video and share it with your friends. Have a lovely day. Enjoy yourselves. Thank you very much for watching.